All right, welcome everyone to the webinar today. My name is John. I'm the VP of Security Services for IDMWORKS. Presenting with me today is Brian Vecchi, the VP of Product Management for SelfService. What we want to talk about today is the importance of having a clean Active Directory and specifically how that relates to identity and access management projects that we've implemented. To start with the presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of background of IDMWORKS itself for those of you who are not familiar with us. We've been operational since 2004, and we partner with a lot of the major vendors in our space across identity management, access management, data access governance, and privileged account management. We're broken up into three core services. The vast majority of the business is the core identity and access management services that IDMWORKS provides, along with 24/7 managed services to support the implementations that we've done. The Identity Forge acquisition that occurred last year, they're a sister company of ours that builds a lot of the connectors that you guys may have utilized in your identity and access management projects today, and IDMWORKS, who does data center migration projects.
All right, and as John mentioned, my name is Brian Vecchi. I'm the Vice President of Product Management at StealthBits, and if you're not familiar with StealthBits, we're a data security software company. Been around since 2001, but the company as it exists now is really about 4 or 5 years old. We're focused on identifying security threats, helping you secure your data and reduce risk across the enterprise. 5 of the 6 largest financial companies use StealthBits software, 40% of the Fortune 100, and most of our customers are in verticals where they have a lot of very valuable sensitive data: utilities, financials, healthcare, retail, and education, those highly regulated industries. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll talk about the growing complexity in Active Directory specifically and what the effect is for you and why you might want to spend some time and energy and resources cleaning up Active Directory. We'll go through some specific access management and consolidation use cases, and we'll talk about how you can use the tools and services from StealthBits and IDMWORKS to clean up Active Directory once and for all. So Active Directory is growing complexity. Active Directory is the technical hub. I like to say it's the technical implementation of your business policy. The majority of our customers admit to us that AD is connecting more and more systems together. It's not just for desktop and server authentication, but it's for authorization to data and even more applications. And because it's connecting all of these disparate systems together in new ways, it's becoming more and more difficult to manage, especially given the native tools that you have for managing authentication and authorization, all of those users, all of the groups, all of the relationships between them. As AD gets more complex, it gets harder and harder for you to effectively manage it. And what does a messy Active Directory really mean for you? Well, if you think about it, think about all of the user objects you have in your Active Directory and all of the computer objects you have in your Active Directory and how many of those don't actually exist anymore. Maybe you have users that have moved on and they're no longer with the organization. Maybe you have service accounts that still exist for applications that you're not using anymore. What about computer objects that are still in Active Directory for machines that no longer exist on the network, that have been decommissioned? What we're hearing is that more of our customers are telling us all of these stale resources is costing them money. Not just in the management of those resources within Active Directory, but often with software licensing costs. How many enterprise applications do you have? How much enterprise software do you have that's licensed by user object or by computer object? So all of those stale resources are costing you money. Many of us don't have any idea which security groups within Active Directory actually do what. We call those group grants. If I were to put somebody into a random security group, just pick a group, what does that actually grant them access to? Is it file system data? Is it application data? Is it both? We don't know what groups actually grant access to which resources in the environment. And the reason for that is that we often don't have good repeatable processes in place for provisioning. If I need access to something, what does that process look like? When I join the organization, what's the process for my user account and my authorization and my group membership? How does that all work? And then maybe more importantly, when I no longer need that access or my account no longer needs to be provisioned, what's the process for deprovisioning? Is that repeatable? You know, if my role changes, do I lose access to all of the previous resources that I had access to? In many cases, the answer to that is no. So as people move through the organization, as their roles change, as they join and leave specific projects, we get access to more and more resources, but often that access isn't taken away. So we don't actually know what users have access to which data and which resources, and we don't know what groups grant access to which resources. A lot of this speaks to the fact that we don't understand the non-IT owners of groups and data. So we don't know who the owners of these security groups are, so we haven't identified them, and then we haven't gotten them involved. IT doesn't usually have the right context to make a decision about who should be in an access control group. If you think about it, granting somebody access to data or an application isn't an IT decision, it's a business decision, right? You're giving them access to a business resource. But we don't have non-IT owners to actually make these decisions or review access on a regular basis, which is why all of this access tends to grow over time. And because of all of this, this messy AD with these complex relationships between users and computers and groups means that we have day-to-day problems with operations and monitoring the domain, maybe many domains, and the domain controllers. We don't understand how our Active Directory is living and growing on a daily basis. So that's what having a messy Active Directory means for you, but why might you want to spend some time cleaning it up? Well, the primary reason that we hear is that it's important to meet your audit and compliance needs. If you want to understand who has access to what data and which resources, who is accessing which data and which resources, and report on that and ensure that only the right people have access to the right data and applications, which is really the goal of many audit and compliance regulations, you need to have a clean Active Directory in order to meet those. If you're going through any kind of migration or consolidation, it's going to be far easier and more likely to succeed if you've cleaned up Active Directory prior to migrating or consolidating. More and more of our customers are going through group transformations, AD transformations, where they go from a chaotic model where they don't understand which groups grant access to what or who's in what group or how they're getting there, to a resource-based model where a single Active Directory group controls access to a single resource. A resource-based model that's clean, but the only way to do that is to clean up Active Directory before you go through that transformation. More and more of our customers are investing in identity management. We're here today with IDMWORKS talking about exactly that. To do that, to make sure that you understand what your identities, how your identities are built and how they relate to Active Directory, it's important to have a clean and well-organized directory structure. And then all of this speaks to security as a whole. Data security, understanding who has access to what, how they're getting that access, ensuring that every user in the organization has the proper level of organization or authorization is dependent upon having a well-structured Active Directory. So with that, I'll hand it back over to John to talk about specific Active Directory cleanup use cases.
Thank you, Brian. So I want to go over two specific use cases today. The first one is an access management project that we did that unfortunately had a lot of messy Active Directory data and the impact specifically that it had to the project. And the second use case I'll go over later is an Active Directory consolidation project. AD consolidation seemed to be huge today within our industry. You know, the improvement of Active Directory, the necessity to split out domains has kind of gone away, and a lot of people are simplifying their infrastructures by going down to a single domain, whereas before they needed multiple domains to handle the specific use cases they had. The first use case, like I said, I want to talk about is the access management use case. We were brought in to do a major version upgrade of an existing product. It wasn't a rip and replace, it was an in-place upgrade of their access management solution, which was heavily utilized throughout the organization. It was protecting over 280 applications. The vast majority of those applications, the authorization policies were tied to Active Directory groups specifically. If you're in this group, you get access to this application, which is the most common use case for authorization policies that we've seen for access management solutions. But the problem as well is the solution was in place for over 5-6 years at this client. The policies that were in it were not kept up to date. The administrators who initially implemented it were long gone. They had different consulting companies come in, different partners. Now you have someone that, or you have an environment where not everyone knows exactly what it does. And this is very common, and they wanted to do an upgrade to stabilize the environment because They didn't keep the software up to date, and it was causing instability and outages. And the number one thing that we're seeing in clients today is availability for access management. And upgrading to a later version always helps with that. So during this project, when we came in, we said from a technical standpoint, upgrading to the Web Services latest versions, keeping and updating the policies from a technical standpoint, it took about 10 weeks worth of effort. The vast majority of that time, though, was wasted because once we upgraded everything in place, we needed a way to validate and have sign-off from each application that on the newer version, everything was still working for those applications. But as soon as we started looking at the policies, they were tied to Active Directory groups that didn't have owners in them. They had a ton of legacy groups in there. There were application names that were very specific, or AD group names that are very specific, but what happened over time is instead of when the group was no longer in use, getting rid of it, a lot of them were actually repurposed. So the naming convention that was used for the group didn't exactly help in identifying what application was currently utilizing it. And this led to a 10-week project extending out to 22 weeks because a lot of it was just internal communication, figuring out who owned what group, figuring out what group still needed to be there, what access the group was truly given, and did it make sense to have this in the authorization policy anymore in their access management solution. We ran into issues with nested groups, and we started with a cleanup project first of just identifying and cleaning up the existing authorization policies. The upgrade would have been much cleaner. We would have had group owners in place. We would have known exactly what each of these authorization policies do. We ended up not even having certain groups be cleaned up because no one knew who owned what. So they said, we don't want to break authentication. The main point of doing this major version upgrade in the first place was for availability. So if we remove a group without someone truly knowing what the impact is, we could break authentication and availability. So they would leave things in place with Mark 2, we'll clean this up later, which we all know never actually gets done. So this is kind of a great use case in terms of, this is not unique to this client. This is a vast majority of our projects run into the same exact issue where as soon as we start getting into the data, we figure out all the gotchas that start to delay projects. The next use case I want to go over is an AD consolidation project. This client was going from 18 different Active Directory domains to a single domain. They had over 275,000 groups across all the domains, but as we saw, thousands of them actually had zero group membership. Thousands more had no owners identified with them, and the user migration strategy that they built into place was built on user account type attribute for the user, but a lot of users didn't have them even set for them. And that's because for different types of users, they had different identity management projects or different standards or manual provisioning that was done. So there was no single core way to create all users in Active Directory, which led to inconsistencies in data across the different domains. And as you'll see when you go, for those of you who may have done a Active Directory consolidation already or those who are planning it, generally when you go from multiple domains to a single domain, it's not a one-to-one match to say everyone from this domain is going to move here to this container now. Usually what ends up happening is you'll have employees spread across multiple domains, you'll have contractors spread across multiple domains, and you want to split them up by user type as opposed to saying everyone in Europe is going to be in this container. So that, which is why we had the user migration strategy go against the account type as opposed to just a one-to-one domain to container match. So for this project, what we did do is we did implement SelfService to help out upfront with identifying that. So the account type missing on large batches of users, especially service accounts, what we figured out was the non-compliant processes in place, and we use SelfService to flag those as non-compliant and keep it up to date as new additional accounts come in. So what we did is we went to the administrator teams, kind of told them where the gaps are, did an initial cleanup so that the account type was set for all the users, and then we had an ongoing process in place of flagging any accounts that got created and being able to fix them immediately so that they would get migrated across properly as they went through the phases of migrating and consolidating all the domains into a single one. The other thing that we were able to do is clean up a lot of the groups that weren't in use. Like I said, if you have 275,000 plus groups and a lot of them are not in use, you don't want to messy your single Active Directory domain. If you're starting new, you have a good chance of keeping it up to date, and you're going from 18 to 1, but you don't want to bring across all the bad data and all the excess groups from all 18 domains into a single domain. When it was spread out, it may be much more manageable, but you have to think about performance of putting all of those groups and all of those users into a single domain. So cleaning all that up front and make sure migration much easier and much more straightforward.
So yeah, thanks, Job. Let's talk about how you might actually accomplish some of the cleanup that we're talking about. The Stealth Audit Management Platform is a common management framework for Active Directory and the platforms that Active Directory controls access to. But today we're talking specifically about one of the products within the framework, Stealth Audit for Active Directory. And what Stealth Audit for AD does is, first of all, help you with Active Directory cleanup by telling you where all your stale users are, all of your empty and duplicate groups, other stale objects within Active Directory where you potentially have duplicate objects, and then giving you the automation to clean all of that up without having to do any manual work. Stealth Audit for Active Directory enables AD cleanup. Second is group management and governance, and what we mean by that is understanding who is in which groups, whether they're getting access through nesting or what have you. Who do these groups belong to, and getting them involved in the authorization and entitlement review process, understanding potentially toxic conditions like circular nesting or cross-domain nesting, and then group transformation, helping you get to that resource-based or single resource-based group model. Stealth Audit for Active Directory is key for many of our customers in meeting their audit and compliance needs, not just with understanding group membership, which is a big part of many of those requirements, but understanding group grants, where these groups grant access on the file systems and in SharePoint and even in Exchange, and then getting owners involved in the provisioning and attestation process and making sure that that whole process is audited and reportable. And then, of course, change auditing within Active Directory itself. Active Directory is a living environment. It's constantly changing, and understanding how those changes are happening is key to meeting audit and compliance goals. And then there's just general operations. Stealth Audit for Active Directory is both a security and an operations product. Maintenance of the domain and the domain controllers, and then continuing to identify and remediate and correct exceptions like very large groups or cross-domain nesting or circular nesting. How does this all work? Well, if you think of your environment, you've got Active Directory, you probably have multiple domain controllers, maybe you've got multiple domains or multiple forests. Within Active Directory, you've got users, the groups that users are members of, that they grant them access to various resources, computer, endpoint and server objects, you've got group policies, you've got the changes that are happening because Active Directory is really a living thing, and you've got group grants, what those groups grant access to on the file systems, Exchange, and SharePoint, and even other applications. What Stealth Audit does is agentlessly go out and gather all of this information, bring it back into a database that lets you query Active Directory without hitting it live. And this allows you to ask the kind of questions and run the kinds of reports that you're unable to do manually. Who is in what group? How are they getting that access? Where are these groups applied? Which of my objects are stale? How can I clean these up? And then we give you workflows, and we let you create workflows around the management and protection of Active Directory, whether they involve data owners or not. And then with our action module framework, you can automate the cleanup and other maintenance and other modifications of Active Directory, and you can do that automatically and at scale. On top of all this, we add a web-based interface, an internal web-based interface called the Access Information Center that allows you to apply governance on top of your Stealth Audit framework. This allows you to not only identify group owners, but to assign them and then get them involved in the provisioning and attestation. Because this is an open framework, because we publish our database schema, it allows us also to integrate very easily with other third-party products. Identity management vendors such as RSA, Avexa, and SailPoint, OEM Stealth Audit to extend identity management to unstructured data. We can also extend to ticketing systems and other third-party products, as well as inbuilt systems. We have a lot of customers that are querying Stealth Audit directly and setting up automation to connect to their own internally built and maintained applications. What does this actually look like? Well, let's start with cleanup. Stealth Audit can very easily show you where all of your stale user accounts are by any criteria you might want to use. Because it's a database, because these reports are based on SQL, you can of course create them from scratch or customize the dozens of reports that we have out of the box. We can also show you all of your stale computer objects as well as empty or duplicate groups. We also have a built-in report for single user groups, right? So you can identify all of those group objects, all of those computer and user objects that you can clean up prior to going through any one of these projects. And then with our action module framework, you can take action automatically and remove these objects through a very specific workflow if you'd like. So for instance, take a stale user object, move it to a staging ground for deletion, notify that user's manager based on the metadata or the AD attribute for their manager, and then wait a certain amount of time and automatically clean that object up. Stealth Audit helps you provide detailed group analysis. Who is in what group, however they're getting access to that group. Maybe they're nested within a group that's nested within another group. We have built-in reports based specifically around group nesting so that you can identify potentially where you have multiple levels of nesting that can be adding complexity to your directory structure. We can show you who's in sensitive groups like domain administrators, including how they're getting that access. So maybe you have a group that's nested within a group that's nested within domain administrators, and you have an effective number of domain administrators that's much higher than you may realize. And then we show you where group membership is broken. For instance, with circular nesting, where a group is its own parent. There's really no reason for this kind of condition to exist in a production environment, but invariably when we spin up Stealth Audit, we tend to find these. Because Active Directory is so complex, this kind of condition just tends to happen over time, mostly by accident. As I mentioned, Stealth Audit can give you group grants. We can tell you where these Active Directory groups have access, where they're applied in the file system, including through nesting because we flatten everything out. And that lets you map Active Directory to the business that's leveraging it to control access to its resources. This is something that no other Active Directory management tool can do. But just because you know where Active Directory groups are applied and how they're applied doesn't mean that you have a good way of governing them. The key thing here is to identify who owns these Active Directory groups. And Stealth Audit has built-in reports for identifying ownership. For instance, if most of the members of a given group all report to the same person, well then you're one phone call away from understanding who the group owner is. But just finding owners is the first step. Now let's get them assigned and involved, either through the Stealth Audit interface or through identity management products like RSA or SailPoint to get them involved in the provisioning workflow and attestation process. So Stealth Audit really provides an Active Directory cleanup workflow, deleting stale objects, helping you map groups to resources, identifying owners, and then getting them involved in the governance and maintenance of their resources. So not only can you clean Active Directory up prior to a major project, you can also keep it clean over time. So just to recap the high-level benefits of Stealth Audit, we're going to help you get rid of what you don't need by identifying stale objects and then giving you the automation to clean things up. You'll be able to understand which groups grant access to which resources, identify and involve data owners, and then meet your audit and compliance needs when it comes to regulated applications and highly regulated data. And all of that's going to help you improve your security posture when it comes to Active Directory and the performance of your domain controllers, and all of the systems that are integrating with Stealth Audit. If any of this looks like it might be interesting to you, we've packaged up a version of the framework along with SQL Express and IIS Express and put it together into a single executable that you can download and install yourself. You'll be able to start gathering data from your Active Directory immediately, see what you can clean up, and then let us and IDMWORKS come in and talk to you about potential next steps. We can perform a formal Active Directory assessment for you. John, do you want to talk a little bit more about the services you guys offer?
Yeah, so IDMWORKS today does a assessment. Normally it's about 4 weeks long, 2 weeks on site, 2 weeks off site, where we help kind of plan and phase out your IAM project. And as part of that assessment, one of the tools that we use is this free assessment tool from SelfService to help identify data issues early on and phase that as part of the plan to say, when you're doing an identity access management project, let's start cleaning up the groups, let's start cleaning up the non-compliant attributes and starting that early in the process. So once we get to production, we don't have to delay rollout for that. So this has been a great tool for us and one of the tools that we use in our toolkit when we go out and do assessments for clients.
That's great. So if you've got questions, I encourage you to ask them now in the questions panel in the GoToMeeting interface, and we will get to them. So the first question we've got is, what's the platform for this software? How do we run it? And that's a great question. It runs on normal computing infrastructure, which really means give us a Windows server and a SQL server, and we're good to go. It runs on all versions of SQL, but for most enterprise environments, we encourage you to use SQL Enterprise. It can absolutely be virtualized, but it does run on a normal Microsoft framework. There's no appliances, and it's completely software-based. Another question here, how is the product licensed? That's great. It's a great question. We don't really care about the number of domains or the number of domain controllers or if you're using Stealth Audit for file systems, SharePoint, how much data we're looking at. It's licensed by Active Directory user, and we will work with you on a licensing model that makes the most sense. Here's another question. Can you do certifications with third-party identity management tools? The answer is absolutely yes. So as I mentioned, we have a governance interface on top of the Stealth Audit framework designed specifically for that, for identifying and getting owners involved. But if you'd like to use a more full-featured identity management solution like RSA Avexa or SailPoint, although I think RSA just changed the name of that to VIA, we integrate with those directly, and both RSA and SailPoint OEM StealthBits for exactly that reason.
Yeah, and as Brian mentioned, that agreement, a lot of clients that we have say, I already have other certifications launched through SailPoint or Avexa, so I kind of want a single interface for users to use. We have had other clients to say, well, SailPoint has a Active Directory connector, why can't I use that, and why do I have to use self-audit? And the answer always is there's different types of data and entitlements that you're trying to certify or test. What SelfService does is it has the crawlers that go out there and grant the file system access so that you know exactly on this file share what rights, read-write access they have, what user IDs have access to that, and then also doing that for SharePoint as well. So all of that data is what those connectors don't bring in, which is why they partner with SelfService today.
It's a great question. Here's another one about the infrastructure itself. Does this require an agent on the domain controllers? That is a fantastic question and one that we always get. The answer is no. All we really need from an infrastructure standpoint on the Active Directory side is a domain user that can bind to the domain and connect to a single domain controller. Since information on the domain controllers is replicated between them, that's really all we need. There's no agents, and it takes a surprisingly small amount of time to gather that what we call Active Directory inventory. That's actually one of the most advanced pieces of technology we have here at StealthBits. We're on our third or fourth major revision of that piece of technology. It's a lot of information to gather from Active Directory. It's a lot of processing to make sure that you understand all of the functional relationships between users and groups and whatnot, and we package that all up and put it together in our database, and it ends up being very non-intrusive on your directory structure. Here's another question. Will this product also work for non-AD directories such as LDAP? The answer is a qualified yes. If we can make an LDAP query, we can certainly do an inventory on it. Our technology is really geared around Active Directory, but let's, we do have customers that are using us for LDAP. So the answer is yes. There may be some features that you're missing, though. Here's a great question. How are stale user accounts detected? Do we use last logon attribute? And the answer is, out of the box, our report leverages the last logon attribute. However, all of our reports are completely customizable, and if there are other ways that it makes sense to identify stale accounts or other stale objects in your environment, we can very easily customize that report. Basically, if we can see the data in Active Directory, get it into our database, we can create a report and then subsequent automation that'll leverage that, information.
I see another question on there about does it support NetIQ IDM? So at the moment, no, but it depends. If you're using AGS for certifications, which is NetIQ has partnered with SailPoint and for certifications initially before building their own access request tool. So if you're using AGS, you can leverage the same capabilities to do certifications there. If you're using NetIQ access request module, which they created, we can build a similar integration to what's there for Alexa and SailPoint today. We are actually in the process of building similar integrations for Oracle Identity Manager and other products, but at the moment, the officially supported ones are SailPoint and Alexa.
Here's a follow-up question to the last logon. Is this able to query all DCs to get last logon data complete? The answer is absolutely yes. So by default, we're just looking. We just look at a single domain controller. But if you want us to look at all the domain controllers to make sure that all the data that we're getting is complete, we are absolutely able to do that. There's no problem with that whatsoever. The StealthBits framework is designed to gather information non-intrusively from your environment from any or all of the machines that are out there. All right. Well, it looks like that's some great questions there. Thank you. That looks like that's all we have for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And John, thank you for the opportunity to talk about StealthBits today.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming today, and we definitely thank you from both IDMWORKS and SelfService for taking the time.
Thank you all. And one quick question, will this recording be available? And the answer is yes, we've been recording. So thank you all. We'll get that link out to you shortly.